Hey everyone, how's it going? Back again with another video this week. And this week's topic is a little bit more fall and winter themed. We're starting to head into that time of year where the temperature's getting colder. And summer's definitely coming to an end. Fall's starting to ramp up here in September. And well, soon enough, it'll be winter. And at least for me, that means snow and cold weather and shorter days. But it also means a kind of shift in diet for a lot of people. And for me personally, and I think many people, they really put a lot of effort into aesthetically looking their best selves during summer because we just tend to have less clothes on. We're more socially active going out and there's more skin showing. So people want to look their best. For me, and that's always nice, but not really the main driver. I had to make weight for a couple of competitions over the summer. So I was being fairly conscious about my food intake and definitely had lowered it from where it was in most of the spring and over the winter and fall time frame. Now that my grip competitions are over and the summer is starting to come to an end, it's time for me to go into a cycle or my training where I'm going to be focusing on strength and putting on some muscle, hopefully along the way. And generally that requires a shift in diet, right? It's a good time, I think, of the year to do this. It's nice that my schedule naturally oscillates this way where I'm not doing as much cardiovascular exercise over the winter. I stop running as soon as there's enough snow to start skiing. So I replace most of my running with skiing anyways. I still do some training on the rower and stuff like that, but I'm not running outside as much. And instead just doing some skiing instead. And I have a little bit more food freedom because I don't need to weigh a specific amount for any competitions or anything. I don't really have any competitions that I train for over the winter. And also there's the holidays and there's a lot of yummy food around with the holidays. It allows me the opportunity to relax my diet a little bit and eat a little bit more calories, but also try to put those calories to good use by building muscle and strength along the way and shift my training more in that direction to complement that goal. I think a lot of people also would find this time of year a little bit more beneficial. And even regardless of just a little bit more flexibility in your diet, at any time of the year, if you spent several months trying to eat a lower amount of calories or lose a lot of weight or lose some amount of weight, cut down for the summer and just be a little bit trimmer, it's beneficial to go in the opposite direction every now and then. Lots of times, I don't want to overblow the concept of metabolic adaptation and your metabolism slowing down. It does happen to some degree, but it's mostly overblown in a lot of social media posts. But it does happen, right? Your body does tend to adapt to the lower amount of calories, and you're stressing that system on the lower end, your metabolism on the lower end of things. So it's good to also go to the opposite end of the spectrum and try to stress it at the higher end of calorie intake, trying to see where your upper limit is. And I have a couple clients that are going to be doing this. I myself am going to be slowly increasing calories over the course of the winter and eating more food in an effort to just gain a little bit more strength and muscle, but also just mentally chill out and relax. I'll just give myself a little more food freedom, not be so concerned about every single thing that I'm eating and not making sure that I need to weigh a certain amount. Just is less stressful. It is, right? And that's one less stress, and that's a good thing too, right? So you can look at it that way as well. So I want to talk about some strategies if you're also thinking about maybe doing this, right? It's winter time. You can relax a little bit with the calories. You don't need to be so strict. And maybe if you do want to do that, the thing I suggest to do is to hit the strength training hard so that the extra calories that you're eating go over to building as much muscle as possible. And so that's the theory, right? One of the main things that you need in an attempt to add muscle is the actual building blocks of that muscle and the energy necessary to create that muscle. Your body does need the energy. And that's why it's so hard for especially trained individuals, people who've been exercising for a longer period of time, to add muscle in a caloric deficit, right? Because they may have enough protein in their diet, but they don't have enough calories to actually physically create the muscle, right? There's enough extra energy around to create the muscle. So that going into a caloric surplus is sometimes, pretty much necessary for a lot of people to actually start gaining muscle. Now, if you're a newbie or you carry a lot of extra body fat, then you might be able to get away building a lot of muscle if you're new to strength training without necessarily being in a caloric surplus. You can be in a caloric deficit just because your muscles have a long way to go to that training adaptation, and or you have a lot of stored energy to put towards creating that muscle that your body doesn't mind giving up in an effort to do. So if you're lean or you've been training for a long period of time, going into a caloric surplus is honestly pretty much necessary. So I wanted to share a little bit about some strategies, how I approach things when doing this, and what I find useful in terms of doing this. Generally, when I start to go into this transition, I try to begin by maxing out my meals. And so I generally eat 3 meals a day, and I just try to eat a little bit more on each meal. It's a little bit more, you know, of the fruits at breakfast. Generally, like I'll generally have a whole banana instead of half a banana type of thing. I will have at lunch, I'll start adding back in addition to the fruit, I might start adding in a little bit of oatmeal in my bowl of fruit to add a little bit more calories this way. And at dinner, it'll be a little bit more of sweet potatoes, squash, stuff like that. So you can probably tell by what I'm saying that I do. What I start with is carbohydrates, right? I actually prefer to get the extra calories from carbohydrates. I tend to tolerate carbohydrates pretty well. And I also find that it gives me better performance in my training so that I can push harder, so that I can train harder and therefore lift more weight and build a lot more muscle. My bias for most people is to add calories in the form of carbohydrates. But that said, if you don't tend to tolerate carbohydrates very well, then you probably are going to add calories in fat. So you'll have to pick more fats to add to your meals as opposed to carbohydrates. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. I personally think that the benefit of carbohydrates is only just because it tends to work really well when you're doing higher intensity, heavier strength training. It tends to fuel that pretty well. And if you are someone who doesn't necessarily tolerate carbohydrates very well, you can still play with adding those carbohydrates, but just stick them around your heavier training sessions, because lots of times that will help mitigate any issues. So it's just something to play with, but it's personal preference. You got to test and see what works out for you. So that's where I start. And I do this kind of incrementally. I find that I'll add a little bit more calories and I start to feel a little bit uncomfortable from a fullness perspective. So I know that's where I'm going to stick here with this amount of food for 1 to 2 weeks. I wait for that fullness feeling after every meal, to like that uncomfortable fullness feeling to dissipate a little bit. And then I'll look at where I can continue to add more calories. It might be adding more fruit at breakfast or lunch. It might be adding a little more, switching out squash for more carbohydrate dense things like potatoes, or adding a little bit more white rice. And then again, I assess how I'm feeling from a fullness perspective, and then decide whether I hold or add a little bit more, and then repeat that process. And I keep going. At some point though, it becomes a little bit challenging for me. Like whole foods, just sticking with whole foods, trying to eat. When I start to get up towards around 3,000 calories, over 350 grams of carbs from whole foods, it just becomes really challenging. So I start to have to really rely on things like oatmeal and white rice, and honestly adding them in at a place where I don't really have a desire to eat them. But sometimes I do push it a little bit, just to, especially if I don't see the scale moving in the right direction. So I tend to want to see a half pound increase in weight a week, hopefully. It doesn't always go that way. Sometimes it definitely stalls out. My body's pretty resilient for things, and I might go several weeks where the scale just is not moving in the right direction and I just feel overly full. But I don't stress out about it. I let the process ride, and I just try and stick with it the best I can. Sometimes I'll go into a week where I just cut back on the calories a little bit, just to give my body a little bit of a break and stop pushing things. So maybe I'll go a week and a half where I let the calories drop back down a little bit, just to give digestion a little bit of a chance to relax, and I'm not trying to push things so much. And then I might go back at it, and that can help sometimes. But ultimately, you start to just add in, when you're talking about whole foods, you start to add in just for the hell of adding in food, because it's just hard to eat that much food. And And some people, I'm not saying you have to go that route, take it to wherever you need. And obviously the goal is to be building muscle. And so if you're building muscle at a nice rate at a modest caloric increase in your diet, then don't mess with it. You don't have to increase it. You don't have to keep on pushing every couple of weeks. Just get to the point where you're starting to feel full, but your performance is actually in the gym is actually increasing. You're able to lift more weights. You feel like you have more energy for your workouts, and you're starting to see the scale go up. And actually, you should see the scale go up. This is a whole goal. You're trying to add muscle to your body. And in order to do that, that means weight. It's going to go up on the scale. And the other problem that a lot of people have is just the mental battle of seeing that scale go up, and it can be hard, right? And it might require maybe not necessarily weighing yourself as much. I like weighing myself. It tells me I'm going in the right direction, gives me that feedback. When I weigh myself every day and I don't let the fluctuations bother me, all the stuff that we talked about before. But I think using the scale when adding more calories is just as useful as doing it when you're cutting calories. But you want to see that scale start to go up. And that's a good thing, right? That's what should be happening. You can use the scale, but if it makes you uncomfortable to see that scale going up, then you can just use circumference measurements. You can use pictures. You can use tight pants tests and all that stuff where you just select your favorite pair of pants and make sure that you're still fitting in them. You use your circumference measurements to make sure that you're increasing, like in the places you want to be increasing, and not increasing size in the places you don't want to be increasing. So for example, you want to see your arms grow, you want to see your legs grow, you want to see your chest grow, your shoulders grow, but you don't necessarily want to see your waist, your stomach grow, right? If you start to see that, then you're probably adding a little bit more body fat than you need to. And for people that might be like really pushing the calorie envelope, you might want to try and play with things like using smoothies. Those can be quite useful to increase calories. You want to start selecting, you can start to add calories like in the form of things that we basically tell you to avoid when you're trying to lose weight. Smoothies are one of them. Things like nut butters, nut seeds, that type of stuff. A little bit extra salad dressing or olive oil or avocado oil, just adding some fats here and there. Selecting fattier cuts of meat. Maybe you have a slice of bacon at breakfast, or you have a whole avocado instead of a half of an avocado, those types of things. We're trying to stick towards the more natural foods. Of course, there's always the conversation of all the dirty bulk and increasing calories from more processed foods. I don't suggest that is a regular practice for most people. When we really start to talk about highly active people, really hard gainers, it might honestly be necessary, but I tend to use the holidays as the time for that. When we start to get towards the holidays and there's lots of yummy baked goods around, things that are just nostalgic that you would like to have that you just don't normally have, then those are or times where you're just gonna have massive meals, right? Like, okay, Thanksgiving, have Thanksgiving, do it up, the turkey, the mashed potatoes, pecan pie, pumpkin pie, all that fun stuff. You can have a day, three holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's, where you just let those foods slide in. And when you're in a caloric surplus, they can be beneficial, right? Yeah. That's where I let those foods kind of slide in more, but they're not, I don't use highly processed foods as an everyday thing when I'm trying to add calories. I try to stick to as much whole unprocessed foods as I possibly can tolerate, and then really start to rely on maybe the more palatable, hyper palatable whole unprocessed foods like the tasty fruits or the white rice. I may use a little bit more honey or maple syrup than I normally would. So those are kind of liquid whole sweeteners. So I might use a little bit more maple syrup on my potato, or I might throw a little bit of honey in my oatmeal. And again, it's just trying to mitigate the uncomfortableness of just being so full, just getting some form of like natural liquid calories into the diet. Those are the strategies I use as I start to increase calories. Do you have any of your own that you like to? Please leave it in the comments below. I'd be happy to hear more about them. And if you have any questions or comments or anything like that, please also leave those below. As always, the best way to keep up with all the content that I put out is via the newsletter. So if you go to my website, rjbhealth.coach, click on the newsletter link at the top, you can sign up for the newsletter there. And I do have some coaching spots open. So if you're interested on getting some help, increasing some muscle and adding increasing your strength and adding some muscle over the fall and winter time, please reach out. I do have spots open. We can work together over that time frame and help you out. The best way to do that is to go to my website, rjbhealth.coach, click on schedule discovery call button, fill out that form, and I'll get right back to you to talk a little bit more. And that would be the best way to do that. But as always, you can always just reach out to me and we can chat a little bit more that way as well. So with that, thanks for all